Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Dana Coolbaugh. Today, I have me a very special guest, Anna K. Moss. Anna, how are you doing today?
Hello, I'm really good, thank you. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, I was really excited that we could reschedule. I'm sure the audience was like, oh God, it's happened to him again. But as long as we're pumping out content and getting people, to buy your books, I guess we're all okay. But I really appreciate you being flexible and helping us out. Anytime where I have to reschedule somebody, I freak out. I'm like, because I want to there's a reason why we invite people on. So, I really want to get people on and, get their name and their product out. Like I had an interview yesterday and I said to the author, I was like, I don't know why, but I was like, every time that we reschedule, like that's like the worst day I've had in like a month. And she's like, oh no. So we were finally able to do it yesterday. I just felt so accomplished. I was like, we got it. I was like, Murphy's Law can't touch us now. So I'm really glad that we could get this going for you today and talk
My
about,
pleasure.
your debut novel, The Worthy. So I was looking at Goodreads and I was like, oh, this sounds really good the other day or a couple weeks ago when I saw it. I can't remember if I saw you on Facebook or where. I got to start writing down where I see people, but I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. Which is also why I love when people share things or, I get sponsored ads or something like that, because it doesn't just help me find books, it's helped me find authors recently to interview. So it was one of those, I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. So really, really
Nice.
glad that we can get you on and talk about your debut novel. So
Cool. Well, I'm glad that you found me. It was probably either on Instagram or Twitter, I imagine.
I
I'm not
think it
on
was, I
Facebook.
want to say Twitter, but everybody always says like, oh, you always say that. I'm like, well, usually it's true, but Twitter's my water cooler, as I say. But Anna, we'll go right there and start right in that first one, which is definitely a fan favorite. It's definitely one of my favorites. What has your writing journey been like up until this point?
I was really, I'm really intrigued by this question because it's the first word that came to mind was isolated, actually. So the last few days have I begun to receive feedback from my ARC readers, my advanced review copies.
Oh, interesting.
So The Worthy is yet to debut.
Yep.
It's coming out on August the 15th. It might be out when by the time that this airs.
Yeah.
But yeah, up until this point, before I'd actually had the feedback from my ARC readers, the only people that had seen it had been a small selection of beta readers and a couple of members of my family. So this writing journey has felt very, very insular, very controlled, very inwards.
Yeah.
And as a result, over the last few weeks, as I've been beginning to do marketing and sending out teaser excerpts and the ARC copies, it's suddenly been, oh wow, I'm really having to now be very kind of exposed and vulnerable. It's no longer like an isolated experience. And that's quite frightening, really, for first time authors, I think. Even I think you'd have to have extraordinary self-belief and maybe a big dollop of arrogance to go, yeah, this is going to be great. Because actually, until you do have that external validation, it's like, I mean, I think this is pretty good, but maybe I'm just totally deluded. So, but actually, yeah, as I say, until a few days ago, then started to get feedback from the ARC readers, and I've been absolutely blown away by it. I was
Awesome.
in tears yesterday from some feedback that I got, and also this morning. That sort of hit of having some really positive feedback was just astonishing. It made that the whole of the blood and sweat and tears of the last months or years really suddenly feel worth it. It was very it was quite a thrill. And it's really what us indie authors rely on is those reviews and feedback from individuals who take the time to support and buy our books.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. My friend was teasing me the other day because I was doing something at my job and I was like, I knew it was the best way it had to be done. And I knew people weren't going to be happy, but I just did it. And afterwards I was like, I don't care. I was just like, see you later. And he was like, I think that, he goes, I hope that you have that same skill when your books come out next year. He's like, because I think it'll serve you well. And I was like, well, I was like, not everybody's going to like everything. You know, I said, I think the thing is, like, I looked at Brandon Sanderson and Ursula K. Le Guin in particular. I got down a rabbit hole on Reddit of their reviews. And I'm like, personally, I think Ursula K. Le Guin's one of the greatest authors of all time, you know, and to see what people said about her or Brandon, I was just like, wow, I kind of feel better now. Like, you know,
Yeah,
Brandon still does really well, and so did she. So I'm just like, well, I think it, you know,
absolutely.
really does come down to, you know, your interests and, you know, being subjective. And there was one book that I read that was an old Forgotten Realms book, and it worked for me. The arc was amazing. I love the character development. It's just so standalone, and I loved it. And I went on, and, you know, it averaged like 3.2 out of 5 on, you know, Goodreads. And I definitely didn't agree with that, you know. So I really think it just goes to show you, you know, that, you know, it really is subjective. But I think you brought up a good point that really just comes down to finding your audience, right? Like, your audience is going to love the worthies. So you just got to go out. And I think that's the hardest thing, is for people to find their audience. That's the thing I'm most worried about, not reviews, but finding my audience.
For sure. Yeah, it felt it one of the ARC readers is super into grimdark fantasy, and when giving feedback drew lots of references to some of my favorite authors, and that was what I thought, well, if this is the only review that I get from this one person, then it just felt amazing. And I
That's
think that's
awesome.
interesting, like as an author, authors have different ways of maybe balancing what they determine success
Yeah,
as.
totally. Totally.
So is it monetary success? Is it about how many copies I can sell? Is it um how much traction or engagement I might get with social media? And yesterday when I got that feedback, I was like, this is it for me. Like, it hit me really right
Oh, that's
in the
cool.
right in the chest, right in the feels.
Yeah.
I was like, this is what success or um, vindication in a way kind of
Good
felt
word
like.
for it.
It's like,
Yeah.
wow, this is because this person really got it.
Mm,
And if that's just that one person that really got it, then I know that I did something
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So yeah, finding your audience is is a key
I like
one.
that word though, vindication. I mean, because it is, right? Like, you know, I 14 years, you know, writing the same fantasy book really. And then, you know, yeah, I mean, you know, when my buddy the other day said something about it. He's like, how's it going? I was like, it's taking me a little bit longer, you know, to figure out a couple of things. I'm like, but that's okay. I'm like, I really want it to be, you know, like the best possible thing, because I've spent so much time and energy on it, you know, and I do want people to enjoy reading it, you know. And I mean, that's books, right? Like, you're trying to get people to read and then read the next one. So it's like, some people are just, you know, I think of it as, oh, it's just my head, and, you know, it's this story and things. And not that you shouldn't tell the story you want, you should definitely do that. But again, I think it comes to, you know, if people aren't liking it, I don't necessarily think that that's the problem. Is like the Alchemist, and I'm totally blanking on who it was written by, but it was out for like 10 years, like something like 10 years before Bill Clinton got to it. And then after that, he sold like 1.5 million copies within, you know, like 2 years, you know, and now it's one of the most successful books of all time. You know, it took 10 years, but, you know, and I think a lot of people forget that George R. R. Martin, you know, he was well known and a heavy hitter, you know, in terms of the industry, but he wasn't until Game of Thrones, you
Mm.
know, and he had been in the game for a long time. Adrian Tchaikovsky, same thing, you know, he was going to give up and then wrote Children of Time, you know, and now, you know, after 15 years. So I just think it's like, I think you made a great point though. It's, you know, vindication, and also how do you measure success, I think is a good one for people to think about.
And I think also that maybe I need to tweet Bill Clinton about my book.
You know what?
I
Just
mean,
say it.
if it worked for The Alchemist, then maybe
It's
it could
so
work
it
with
was just
me.
it was such a weird, I had no idea. I thought it came out that year. And then when I, you know, started studying publication on my own, and a friend sent me this article, goes, I think you should read this article. And I read an article about it. I was like, that is such that story in itself is interesting. Like The Alchemist, I read, I absolutely loved it. It's one of my favorite books I read in the last 10 years, and has one of the greatest arcs. But like, I'm just thinking to myself, like, how that just goes to show you, right? Like, I have a friend who has a book out recently and it just had the novella out, the prequel novella. And I haven't gotten to it fully, but I was like, I just want to see what's going on, you know? And it's very Robert Jordan like. And I'm thinking to myself, like, you just have not found your audience yet. I'm like, this is fabulous. This is totally up my alley for, you know, Malazan Book of the Fallen or whatever, you know? And I do think it just comes down to, I told him, I was like, please do not quit. I was like, please just keep going. Like, I know it's hard. I run a podcast. Like, I get it. You know, we're trickling compared to a couple weeks ago, what we were like skyrocketing, and now it's here. And I'm like, it's the same thing, you know, for reviews or book sales, you know, and I just think it comes right back to what you said, you know, about like, how do you measure success? And, you know, I also think you made a good point about what vindicates your writing or, you know, yourself as an author. And I just don't think a lot of people think about it. I think they just want to get the book out, but they don't think about, you know, their goals. I just talked to another author today. I said, well, what are your goals? And he was like, what? I'm like, yeah, what are your 5-year goals? What are your 10-year goals? You know, like I have them, you know, in 5 years, I want 50 books, you know, is that hard? Yeah. But even if I hit 25, that's going to be really successful. Even 15, you know, would be really successful, 3 a year, you know? And he was like, wow, I never thought of that. And I talked to a artist the other day where she said the same thing. She's like, I don't really know. I'm like, it's great to get the product out, but I just think it's, you know, it's also important to think of like, you know, where you want to be. Because just as like a teacher and coach, I just know that setting goals is more helpful. So I think finding what vindicates you, like you said, I love that term for it. And, you know, really thinking about it. I think in the long run, I think you'll get less burnout and you'll enjoy the writing more. And I think you'll find that other things that you didn't know will vindicate you. But yeah, I think, you know, really find the audience helps to be, you know, to vindicate your writing.
Absolutely. And I think you're totally right about the goal setting as well. I love achieving goals. And I think
It feels
that
good.
what I was saying about, you know, like the experience of writing for a very long time in an isolated way,
Yep.
without setting kind of mini, tiny little goals, you know, even down to the hour. Like if I can just get through the next
Yeah.
passage, I'll go and have a nice cup of tea and a piece of toast. Or, you know, if I can manage to do this many words by the end of this week or this month, then having that kind of little hit of achievement
Yep.
was almost my own success, and that
Yeah. Yeah.
internal success or validation had to be there to be able to kind of
Yeah.
uh enable me to go the distance, because writing is certainly to me feels much more like a marathon than
Yeah.
a
That's
sprint.
true.
And
Yep.
you've got to have those little kind of almost like little water or jelly shot breaks when you're doing a
Yeah.
marathon. You've got to be able to have that when you're writing as well, because you know, otherwise, even if you can really envisage that end goal with everybody going, yeah, you did it, it feels intangible until you really get to that point. So you've got to
Yeah.
have some way of having some rewards and that validation along the way, and goal
Oh,
setting I
totally.
think is a great way to do that.
Yeah, well, that's why I, you know, at first I was just planning on writing a novella for my own fantasy setting. And I was like, oh, 10,000, 5,000 words. I was like, oh, 10,000 words, 15,000. Then I got going. I was like, ooh, this is like a trilogy. And my friend's like, what are you talking about? And I said, oh, I really discovered, you know, like these great themes, these characters. And I was like, I think there's a lot here. Rogues, of course. So people on here know I absolutely love rogues and thieves, you know, and now I'm like, okay, well, I had a couple others. I was like, yeah, they're gonna be novellas. And now I'm like, or short stories. I was like, oh, now they're novellas. And I'm like, came up with one series of novellas for like a Sinbad, like thief type character that just gets into a lot of trouble and is a lot of fun to write. So it's like, yeah, it's just interesting. Like you said, like I'm starting now to be like, oh, okay, I just want to start to just finish things. At first, it was like, oh, I just want to finish this chapter. I want to finish, you know, this part of the book. And then after my first book, I was like, okay, well, draft one's done. Now I want draft two. And then when I got stuck with that, I was like, well, I'd write a short story and then novella. And now I got like 3 prequel novellas. But it's fun, right? I think it's fun to finish, you know, even a
Yeah,
draft. And it's cool now to be like, oh, I am 2 scenes away from finishing 2 books, you know? Yeah. So
absolutely. And you've
yeah,
got to
it's a good point. I
celebrate
didn't
those
think of that.
wins as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've got to celebrate those kind of, you know, I finished the first draft. Or and
Yeah.
sometimes I see people on Twitter, they almost kind of throw it away of like, oh, hey, writing community, finished my first draft. And it's like, no. Like I always respond with like, please go and get some champagne or
Yeah.
something,
It's a great
because you've
accomplishment.
got to give
Most
yourself a
people
pat
don't
on
even
the
do
back.
that. Like, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm a
you've got to
martial artist
celebrate
and
those wins.
Yeah, no, totally. I'm a martial artist. We talk about all the time. We're like, how many people that start don't get their black belt? And then when you get a second black belt, it's like it's even smaller. And when you're talking about writing a book versus martial arts, most people do martial arts instead of writing a book. So it's like such a smaller community, and then people that, like you said, write a draft. I know so many people like, oh, I did write a book, but I didn't put it out there, or I just didn't finish. And I'm like, why? Like, and I'm like, I get it because it's hard, but and it costs money and things. But at the same time, it's like think of how many. That's what I like about indie publishing is like think of how many books we did not get. Think of how many Ursula K. Le Guin's that were out there that we will never hear their story because of people within the last few decades within publishing. We're like, oh, with querying or whatever, we're like, oh, like imagine if they had indie publishing and the confidence and people encourage them. Like, we could, it blows my mind how many amazing stories we probably missed out on because of lack of confidence and, lack of resources, like now indie is just like, I remember when I was, 8 years ago, basically, yeah, 7, 8 years ago, I met a bunch of indie authors with Kevin Hearn. Brandon Sanderson had just came out. He was there with Way of Kings. Patrick Rutherford had just came out with In the Name of the Wind. And, people were being polite and going and getting their signatures. And then 3 weeks later, they're like, oh man, what do I have here? But there's so many indie authors there too that were, that were there. And now I look back, 10 years later almost, and I'm like, wow, like their careers have changed a lot because they stuck in the game. But some of those people that were there, which I usually don't talk about, wrote 1, 2, maybe 3 books and they were done. So it's interesting to see where these people already had a trilogy and just kept pumping out content. And now they're like household names. Brian McCullough is one of them. He had his first Powder Mage book and,
Yeah, totally. Like
Yep.
other than Abercrombie,
Yep.
I tell so many people about Brian McClellan because it's weird. He still seems to me like Brian McClellan isn't still
Yeah.
that known within
Yeah.
fantasy
It's
realm. I'm
crazy.
like, he's just amazing. Like
Yeah.
one of my
He's so
absolute
cool
heroes.
to listen to. I want to have him on at one of these points. I'm like, I just love hearing him talk about writing. I mean, his world building is just like, he's helped me so much with just listening to him on how I build. But you think of like, if he hadn't have sold, I don't know. It's crazy to think about how many people like that, like that we wouldn't have. And my buddy and I were just talking about the other day, another author, and he was just like, oh, that really bugs me now. He's like, we would have, he's like, I have to have so many more shelves. I'm like, I know. I was like, we're all saving space, but at the same time, we're missing out on these great stories. So I always encourage people just to, I'm like, tell people the podcast too. Like, if you need help, like, just let me know. Like, if I can't help you, find somebody that can, like, I want to read your story. So
Awesome.
I imagine. Speaking of stories though, Anna, what is your debut novel, The Worthy, about?
Well, without sounding too much like I'm reading the blurb from the back of a book, which
All right.
can
Well,
be
first of all, I
tricky.
was going to say that was the next thing I was going to add is I wanted to know after this. So why don't you tell us that? But I also want you, I'm going to insert how'd you come up with your blurb because I read a lot of blurbs and that was a really good blurb. So
Oh,
definitely
thanks
want
so
to talk
much.
about that. So feel free
Oh,
to read it
sure.
if you want because that's a good blurb because we're going to dissect
Well,
it a little bit. So
well, I'll tell you what, then I will read the blurb because I have a copy of my, my book, The
it
Worthy
looks really
here.
good, by the way.
Thanks. Blood is thicker than water. Tell that to Prince Barston, betrayed and abandoned on foreign soil. His sister is intent on claiming the throne, and he's intent on stealing it back. One of them might succeed if it weren't for a sacred creature infecting people with its emotions: rage, fear, paranoia, despair. As their country collapses, the royal siblings must stay true to themselves or find out just how thick their blood really is. And in essence, really, without sounding without kind of moving away from the blurb, it's set in a kingdom, the kingdom of Krell. People in Krell are starving. The paranoid king has waged war for decades, and the country is really in a sorry state. Princess Aelith and Barston, who I just mentioned in the blurb, they have to prove themselves worthy of this throne. And Barston decides to do that by pillaging a wealthy nearby nation.
Mhm.
However, he is betrayed by his mentor in the kind of, very initial opening chapters of the book and left for dead. Now, who he's betrayed by takes this sacred creature from this nation, not knowing what its particular powers are, and transports it home to the nation of Krell,
Interesting.
where Aelith is trying to prove herself worthy of the throne. However, as the creature's particular powers, it's not magical powers, it's literally just its own biological defense mechanism.
Oh, cool. I was gonna ask you about that. That's awesome.
Sure. So how it's how it defends itself. So as it becomes
Makes
soothed or
sense.
happy, then people around it feel calm and loving. Whilst it's frightened, angry, then those around it feel frightened and angry as well. And those feelings really begin to permeate through the city, the capital city of Cremor, and infect essentially this entire
Oh, wow.
nation. So it has an enormous effect on the citizens. So meanwhile, whilst all that is going on, and Aelith is trying to hold the country together and prove that she's the right ruler, Barston is trying to make his way back from the nation which he was pillaging and was betrayed in. So there's kind of an epic journey for him across seas and over land in order to get back to the capital to enact revenge. It's worth mentioning as well that Aelith has a pretty explosive secret. She has a secret lover, a woman, and in the nation of Krell, unfortunately, amongst their other prejudices, it is a pretty homophobic place to be. That's something that I wanted to bring into the story as a queer person, and certainly my experience of growing up in the 80s in deepest, darkest England. I did experience biphobia, and I wanted to bring part of her pain, Princess Aelith, and her experience of not being able to be out and experiencing longing and love and trying to save the person that she loves ultimately, whilst all the while appearing completely in control and capable of ruling this nation. So it's very high stakes for the two siblings, and there is a lot of violence, there is a lot of gore, there's a lot of treachery, and yeah, I guess in some ways you could describe it as if Game of Thrones had a weird kind of baby with perhaps parts of 28 Days Later, where we see things really kind of collapse. That sort of anger and violence and paranoia which kind of spreads throughout our population, but that sort of core intrigue and treachery is there on another level as well.
Oh, interesting. Wow, you had a lot there. I was like, oh, that's cool. I was like, what do I ask? I was like, that's really deep. I guess first of all, themes is what I kind of want to break down there. Like it seems themes and conflicts, I guess is maybe the best way to put it. So you have the thing that surprised me the most with your blurb was that you just, first of all, the hook, just that first line was awesome. And then you actually went in to talk about the story. So I was like, ooh, that's a good little quote there. I was like, I started thinking about it. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then, the next line in particular really drew me in. And then from there, especially like, the creature with the emotions, I was like, oh, that's really cool too. And I was like, that really like made me wonder, like, is it magical? Is it just how, is it an organism, how it works? Like my analytical mind was like, I have to read this book just to figure out how this creature works. But I did like the themes that you talked about there: betrayal, discrimination, equal rights, past trauma. And there seems to be a theme lately with people who we've had on, which I really like, where, because I do that a lot too, in terms of, trying to come up with a more realistic character or, or story where it's almost like a couple people I've read recently where it's like almost like H.M. Long's one where I'm reading like her book Hall of Smoke, where there is a lot of trauma, and the main character, her whole village gets killed, and you find that out like really soon in the the blurb and stuff. And she's got to go on this quest, and I just think I liked it so much because the character felt real. So, in terms of your themes and conflicts, like it seems to me like you're just like, I'm a history teacher. So it really just seems like anything that I teach or any news article or person you talk to, just in a fantasy setting. And I like that because I feel like people, your audience and your readers will be able to connect more with your characters and they'll like it because it's grimdark, right? But at the same time, they come because it's grimdark, but they're going to leave, I feel like, because you have more realistic themes and conflicts going on between your characters, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that I really wanted to bring to the fore of my writing, is not only my own kind of personal experiences, but certainly the zeitgeist of how it feels to live in the UK at the moment, certainly over the last few years. Without kind of diving too much into politics, the hardening of national borders, as I know that you would have seen in recent years in the US,
Yep.
the that sort of pointing a finger of it's over there that the problem is, that's coming in and creating issues. All the while we see pretty much whole scale corruption,
Yeah.
and I find that, and I know lots of other people find that deeply upsetting.
Yeah.
And that's one of, actually, on the back of the book is one of my favorite lines, which is, "That's what being a leader is all about, persuading the masses to hate your enemies for you." And it's that kind of prejudice which is inflamed, I think, by modern day media, which means that we are looking outwards and we're pointing our fingers at others, really, rather than kind of cleaning up our own mess. And that's
Yeah.
something that I wanted to bring to the fore within The Worthy, that this sort of superiority, nationalism, which I think has quite dire consequences.
Yeah. That is, yeah, nutshell, right? Right, we keep bringing that up over and over again. I'm teaching ancient history right now, and then I usually teach like middle school here, so usually I teach like U.S. history. So it's interesting to see that nationalism really hasn't changed too much, over the years. I mean, look at Ukraine and Russia right now, and it's like hasn't changed. Look at United States, hasn't changed. So yeah, it is quite interesting. You brought up your quote yesterday, actually. And use that quote actually because we were talking about the corruption of different governments in ancient kingdoms. So that came in really handy.
Oh, I
In my
feel
other
honored.
class, we're
That's
getting
nice.
to that tomorrow. So my other class period, we'll get to that tomorrow. So we were talking about my co-teacher and I were talking about making that a poster actually. So we're trying to make it an advertisement for you there.
Love it.
Got a lot of kids in my classes that love grim dark during the year and stuff. So I'm sure they'll get a kick out of that. But yeah, we were just like, man, that was really true. But I love that quote on the back. I think in terms of just pointing out to people for advertising, in advertising your book and your story, and then getting into the genre very easily, I just felt like your blurb and then that quote in particular, like, were very fascinating and
Thank
pulled
you.
me in instantly. So, I mean, the book, the cover looks absolutely great for the genre. But to me, it was really like the blurb and then that quote mixed with the cover it was like 1, 2, 3 out of 4 boxes. And I
Oh,
didn't even get to the fourth one. So I was just like, okay, cool.
that's lovely to
So
hear. I'm
just want
pleased
to
that
say, I
was.
feel that that's working definitely for you. I feel like that's going to work really well for you. I look at a lot of books, a lot of blurbs, not only for myself, but people always ask me, and I think I'm horrible at writing blurbs, but I know, which ones I like. I'm just like, oh, I like it, and this is why. So I just want to point out to the audience that if you're having trouble, go and check out Anna's blurb to kind of dissect it. And then we're going to bring in the boys from Wizards, Warriors, and Words. They have several episodes that they have done to dissect different blurbs. So the things that they are saying to do, yours does very well. So they want them shorter. They want the hook. They want a little bit of, what's going on, but still that mystery. And I feel yours, like, off the last time where they kind of explained what they look for as readers and look for in writing their own. I feel like yours checks all the boxes. So I think that it's really, really good.
Thank you.
Very jealous.
That's great.
Very jealous. I'm actually collecting authors blurbs who I like to study to write my own. So yours is definitely one of them. So now I need
Wow.
a cool quote on the back too. So Thanks for for changing that for me.
No worries. I mean, that's literally how I wrote mine, was that I looked at my favorite authors, so, you know, especially within the genre of dark fantasy and
Mm.
and grimdark, and just tried to kind of break it down. What is it that they're actually doing here with the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
with the structure? So, you know, learn from other authors who have done it before, and who have editors and marketing teams to be
Yeah,
able to help them.
that's the key, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's no, it's totally true. Well, it's interesting that you just so because you brought that up. It's interesting to see people compare the audiences and the blurbs for traditional publishing versus indie publishing. Um, so sometimes you'll see people copy them and then they don't work. So maybe somebody in indie tries to copy, Brandon Sanderson's or somebody from Tor, and that's not always, I don't recommend that. I think you should, like you said, like find the authors. I think if you're indie personally, I would, not that you can't learn something from both, but I've just seen people who are like, oh, this isn't working. I'm like, well, the indie crowd is a bit different than, particularly grimdark fantasy is different. Like Joe Abercrombie's over here doing one thing, but he's Joe Abercrombie. Brandon Sanderson's over here doing one thing, and there's so many great female authors that I've read recently where I'm like, oh, they're definitely doing their own thing and it works. But, for their types of tales and marketing. But again, they're bigger names, and they can get away with that. Fonda Lee, I think, can get away with a lot more than, somebody like myself, coming into urban fantasy for indie, and I think it's really important to, study everybody's, because you never know, you might have the next big thing. But definitely, I think, go with who is in your genre and who is, you might just want to look at it, just something to think about, traditional versus indie. But yeah, it's interesting. Once I was studying different people, I was like, oh, this is a totally different type at times of a marketing campaign, and you can tell the audiences are a bit different. But grimdark's always grimdark, I think. But we'll go right into that. I'm kind of going to combine these two. I have to switch this around because I have to know now about this creature. So it sucks in emotions, right, and can emit them back to people. Now, you said it was not magical in nature. So it's an organic creature then? I don't want to spoil anything for anybody, but
yeah, no, it's fine. So it is an organic creature. It doesn't suck in emotions. It's literally is just projecting its
oh,
own.
okay. Its emotions. Oh, that's
yeah. So it's this tiny ape-like creature. It's very, very small. One of the ARC readers said, it's just so sweet. And I was really delighted by that, because it is something that's very small and precious, but at the same time can wreak absolute havoc. So if it's feeling pretty blissed out, then it's, spreading its emotions
Yeah, you don't want to be in
outwards
the
and
middle of a battle, right?
yeah. But if it's frightened, and those around it become frightened, it doesn't affect everybody. There is a small percentage of the population which remains uninfected. But of course, if they're around people which are affected and become violent or paranoid or fearful, then they themselves are going to be screwed one way or another, because somebody, you might turn on your best friend as you become fearful, or your wife, or or whoever, because you become so full of this emotion. And there's one character in particular who's very, very closed down with his feelings, and there's kind of a with a lot of medievalism within fantasy, an element of that sort of toxic masculinity of, a man's man, and we've got to swing our swords and we don't talk about our feelings. And this one character is really, really, really very much suppressing his feelings, even though he's affected by the creature. He has kind of some mastery over what he's going through, but ultimately, well, we'll see what happens. I'm not going to give more away about that particular character. But yeah, as I say, it is biological. It's a strange little beast that's been found and cared for many years by the nation of Jin Tin, which is this nation which is pillaged at the beginning of the book. and then transported across the seas. And who knows? Hopefully one day it will get back. We'll see.
Oh, that's interesting. Now, in terms of, that's why I flipped this. So in terms of world building, did you have that idea first, or were you building your world and then that kind of came in later? I was just curious about like that type of process.
It came in the very early stages of setting out the plot, actually. So I had the idea, oh gosh, must be about 10 or 12 years ago for the
Oh, wow.
for the main character and what he was going through. And I wanted to write very much a morally grey character, somebody who in a way is a bit of a Joffrey, you know, from Game of Thrones.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
he's pretty unpleasant. There's some definite arrogance. He's not psychopathic at all in the way in which Joffrey is. He's mainly pretty naive. And I wanted to write somebody who was difficult in that way, was kind of a difficult character to, in some ways, to get behind, somebody who was very much morally grey and wasn't, you know, a Conan type, definite good guy hero, but instead somebody who was really difficult. And of course, he does go on his own development arc throughout the story. So it was originally, you know, an idea about him, and I thought for a long time about this particular character, and that he was probably going to try and prove himself, and that would probably involve pillaging a nation. And then actually when I sat down and really started plotting things out, I was like, what is it that could be brought back from that particular place, this beautiful place that he goes to, which could destroy his own. And of course, it's a pretty famous, you know, pretty well used trope within fantasy, is that powerful artifact. But
Yeah,
I
I like
didn't
how you
want
went
it.
with a creature. It's just
Yeah.
so much better, because I'm just thinking of like all the implications, you know, like you were saying earlier, like when it's scared, you know, versus like just an item that corrupts. Like that's just one. I guess it's because you came up with an idea that's multifaceted. And I'm thinking of the world building implications. Like, is it the only one? Are there more of them? Were there more of them? Why aren't there more of them now? Like the world building just like goes on and on and on. And it's just like, it's so much more interesting to me than just, and even a
A magic
magical creature.
sword.
Like yours is non-magical. Like there are magical creatures that do that, you know, and yours is non-magical. Like that to me, just like it just adds a whole bunch of faceted layers. And I feel like you could just go on and on with, you know, interesting conflicts that, you know, you've come up with because of that idea.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I feel quite lucky that I came across that particular idea because of the way in which it could affect people or not affect people.
Yeah.
And then so it starts to bring in lots of different dynamics on
Yeah.
a very local sort of personal scale, but then becomes pretty much sort of whole scale
Yeah.
destruction. And how somebody who's actually trying to sort everything out, and Princess Aelith, and you know, right the wrongs of what's going on in the nation, all the while really trying to sort things out within this city which is completely collapsing. So it goes from that conflict of personal into you know, a much sort of wider scale.
Yeah. Like the sociological. Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah. And so yeah, and isn't just say one person wielding it like a magic sword. I mean, I love a good magic sword story,
Yeah. Who
uh,
doesn't?
but but it's, you know, it's normally about that one person who has control of that one particular magical object, and then what they can do with it. And I wanted it to be something which affected one of the characters is a tiny little girl who lives in the slums of the city. So we see things from her perspective as well as the city begins to fall apart. So I wanted something which was going to affect a lot of people in different ways.
Yeah.
And there the creature was born.
Yeah, that's cool. I just want to point out to the audience that like sometimes, like let's say that you, I don't know if this happened, but let's say that you did, let's just pretend, right, that you had an item and then you went through with your draft 1 and draft 2 and you're like, okay, it's a great story, got great characters, but I need to change something, like something doesn't fit. Like that's not a, it's crazy to think, right, that that's not a big leap. You know what I mean? Like in terms of, oh, it's going to be a creature. Well, magical or non-magical. Like it seems like point A to point B is not that big of a leap, but it really is. It's not a big difference, to do, but it is in terms of the thinking. And then the repercussions of it is huge. I mean, you go from, what could be a mediocre fantasy story, from what most people's perspective, to all of a sudden you have this great unique idea. And I just think it's important to point out, because you could just be like doing the dishes, right? And you could have been, oh, it's an item or a sword or whatever, or a ring. And then all of a sudden, bam, oh, it's a creature. Well, is it magical or non-magical? And then you're still, then you go and whatever, you're like about to go to Target or something, I don't know. And then all of a sudden go to the store and all of a sudden, bam, you're there. And then all of a sudden you have this amazing story and idea. It's like, I just think it's not that far of a reach, to think that you have something great, but maybe you just need to tweak one small thing to all of a sudden, I don't know. You know what I mean? It doesn't seem
Absolutely.
like it's a big deal. It is a big deal, but it doesn't seem like it is at the time. But then it changes your entire story. And then that changes your entire world. And then, now it's going to change your entire, next set of books or whatever that are based in this world. I mean, that's really cool.
Thank you. And I think it does help to think about what it is that you want to achieve with it. So say I did want to write a story about a magical sword which had this particular power, you could still write something incredibly interesting with that
Yeah.
if it was about the particular person's journey. It could be a really morally grey character that happens to have the sword, and there's a lot of inner turmoil about how they deal with their newfound powers, and that can be the essence of the interesting kind of hook or difference about it, which takes it from a typical hero's quest to something which I think modern fantasy audiences certainly expect is something which is much more multi-layered.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and that's really what got me to the place of writing about this creature, because I knew that I wanted to do something which had a sociological impact as well as a personal impact, and the way to do that wasn't with an artifact, it was with something which had far more kind of reaching powers. So sometimes it helps, I think, as a writer to think, what is it that I want to achieve with
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
and then finding the thing that kind of gives you the almost the idea, that transportation to
Yeah.
get you to that place.
Yeah. Well, I have like a city from where my thieves are. And I was like, well, I had stuff that wasn't working. I was like, I'm like, well, I needed to show the differences between the social classes. And I wanted it to be based on the structure of the city. And I wanted to show the desperation. Because my friend was like, I was talking to him and he was reading some of it. He's like, why on earth do these two kids care about joining the Thieves Guild? So I'm like, well, something isn't working there. So I was like, I'm going to change how the city is layered. So I have this outer part called the gutters, where literally if you're the poorest of the poor, you're out there. And it's awful. Like you'll walk by, people are murdered, whatever, there's dead bodies all the time, and there are particular places where, you just don't want to be unless you're protected. And that's like the main one. And then as you go in, it gets richer and richer, where, you might have 100 people living in like a tenement, on the next layer in, where then in the middle, these people have like square miles, like the rich, these estates. And I wanted to show that, that there's a reason why, they're so desperate. And for some reason, one day I was like, well, how do I do that? And I was like, well, they're from the gutters. I got it from this one game. I liked it. And I was like, well, but they have to be gutters. So I literally have it where everybody else's trash like goes out to those areas. And then it's also dangerous because certain, creatures come out and, are carry on or whatever, and they're trying to pick through it. And it's like, it's the only way a lot of people make their living. And I was like, it was one little thing though. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, this city is so much cooler. And now you understand the desperation, of these two young men, why they would take on such a dangerous quest and, possibly die. I just think that there was a huge disconnect. So I think it is,
That's
like you
so
said, it's interesting to see, because I had to do the same thing. Like, well, what do I want to show at the end? Like where does the
absolutely.
theme, really match here? So I think
Yeah,
that's great advice right there. So
finding that, and always, it's always really coming back to that, asking yourself of well, why, what is my character motivation? And if you can't
yep.
actually justify what your character is doing at that time, then then you probably need to have a rethink. And then in
Yeah.
finding that motivation, like you have done, is like, well, why would they go into this particular place? Then you've created this whole other incredible part of
Yeah.
world building as a result of
Feels
it,
deeper.
because
It feels like you're going in deeper water versus shallow. And I think you get
absolutely.
a lot more out of it. Like my friend, he's like, well, I always think of world building like, he's like, I don't like the iceberg. He goes, I like to think of it like like a pool or like a lake. And he's like, if your world building's really shallow, he's like, you're just not going to get enough fish, And I'm like, I was like, I don't know why I didn't think of that, And I'm like, that is true. I'm like, the deeper the world building, the more books I will buy, like the more I will read. There was one book I read recently and almost said the wrong thing. H.M. Long's like Hall of Smoke. Like I'm gonna want to listen to that on Audible. I like to read books first and then listen to them on Audible. And I'm like, I need to listen to this book on Audible because I always get more out of it the second time because the world building was so deep. And I'm like, I know I missed things before and I liked seeing how it was put together and kind of dissecting it. But yeah, it's interesting when you really look at it. But yeah, I was thinking like it felt deep to me, like right off the bat, and I felt like this is a world I, could read 10 books in and immerse myself, and I don't really even care how much I have to pay for them, to be quite honest. So,
Love it.
which actually leads me to my next question. So what are your plans for After the Worthy? Like, is this going to be a trilogy, duology? Like, how many books do you plan for this world or maybe this like particular set?
So certainly a duology. I think, to be honest, what the plans that I have for the characters, and the world of the old lands, and the nations therein, I feel like another book is necessary. But at the moment, I don't have plans for a third, but there will be a second. And in the meantime, until the release of that, I'm going to be releasing short stories.
Oh, cool.
I'm also doing some interviews with indie authors, myself, which will be
Oh, awesome.
on my site.
Oh, that's
Um,
awesome.
it's been really wonderful, actually. I'm mainly active on Instagram rather than Twitter, and the Bookstagram community is just so nice. I was quite fearful of being more active on social media.
Oh, yeah.
I think, oh God, what if I just get trolled all the time, or what?
Oh, yeah,
What if
yeah.
people are mean or anything? But Bookstagram, oh my goodness, it's just so lovely. Everybody's just so supportive. I've never had a negative interaction with anybody. People are so kind, and I've met some really, really talented
Oh, yeah.
authors. Um, so yeah, I can recommend it to anybody who isn't a big part of the Bookstagram community to dive in, because everyone's just so nice. So yeah, and through that have met some other indie authors which I'm interviewing, along with some people who are actually outside of writing,
Oh, cool.
some gamers,
Oh, cool.
and so people who kind of are bringing a slightly different perspective to narrative,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
narrative form.
That's like
Um,
I just had so many people ask about the author side. I'm like, I've been trying to get comic book artists. I was trying to get some blacksmiths. That's why, like, my friend, he's like, your podcast doesn't really name your show very well. I said, yes, it does. I said, we just been doing. I said, this is just what I'm doing right now. I said I want to get cosplayers and different people, particularly for YouTube, to do different stuff. So yeah, I feel
nice.
that anything that helps people write, because I think there's like blacksmithing, like most people probably have never been to a blacksmith, and I thought it'd be cool to see their processes and things. And I'm addicted to blacksmithing. Like I think it's so cool. I want to do it sometime. But yeah, that's
Awesome.
awesome. I'll definitely have to check that out. You have to send me those when you get them, because I'll check them out and we'll share them as well. That's really cool. I like
Brilliant.
interviewing people. I think it's fun to, see people's different different perspectives. It's interesting when you can look at the same thing like writing like millions and millions of different ways. So, or like, one thing, but yeah, it gets interesting. Which kind of leads me to the
Absolutely.
next one. Like, what's one writing tool or strategy that you think maybe you want to try when writing your next book?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question.
Or it could be like, is
So
there a trope that you really like that you're trying to bring into, book two or whatever that you thought, oh, that might be kind of fun and fit. Like, so I consider that a strategy, like using a particular trope. But
Yeah. So probably less so on the tropes. I'm an editor for other authors.
Oh,
I've
cool.
mainly been doing work through private referrals.
Oh,
More
perfect.
recently, I will be starting to advertise my services probably in a
Oh,
month or two
cool.
post book launch. Um, but one of the things is it's hard to edit your edit your own work, as I'm sure writers who
Oh,
are watching this will um
yep.
yeah would sympathize with. Um, and so I guess one thing which with writing the short stories, which I'm doing at the moment, and writing the second book, I'm really trying to allow myself to just write and not edit as I go.
Hard.
I found with the first book that although there were some structural changes that I'd made, there wasn't a huge amount of content editing that needed to be done. I was kind of surprised actually with um, that it wasn't every single sentence had to be tweaked and removed and rejigged and made more beautiful. I was like, oh, maybe maybe the editor's just sort of missing something here. And then I was like, well, no, actually, I understand it because the first time as I'm writing things down, I'm looking very much at the sentence structure because I've got my editor's head on whilst I'm
Yeah, yeah,
writing and looking at things like, oh, that could be made a bit tighter here. This could be made a little bit more descriptive there. And sometimes that means I lose my flow about
yeah, yeah,
what the
yeah,
story is or the emotional state that the characters might be in at that time. And I think it's really important to try and get yourself into that emotional state to write with realism for those characters. And so that's something that I really want to try and do more of with future writing, is just
yeah,
letting
yeah,
myself go and really very purposefully stopping myself as I'm copy editing
yeah, yeah, yeah,
as I go.
yeah. I think that's really good advice, first of all, but I think that makes total sense. I stopped. I was like, I'm just gonna write like my first novella now. I'm like, this is horrible. I was like, but it has to be done, right? I have these two fight scenes to write, and I'm not a big gun person, but I got these recon Marines, and I'm like, I'm just gonna write something, and then I'm gonna send it off to somebody who's been in that circumstance, and I will have them help me out. I'm like trying to learn everything, before writing is just not going to happen. And I can watch videos after, but I'm like, this needs to be done. And then anything I do later is going to be done the editing process later for draft two. So I think that's the hardest thing, is to not edit while you're writing. I've been really like, I'm not going to edit until I'm done. And
Mm.
I've had to develop that as a skill, because as a teacher, it's really hard. As a coach, it's really hard. It's like, I want to fix it now. And
And
that
as
that
an editor, it's really hard, I can
yeah,
tell you.
I can imagine. I had a hard enough time, so I can only imagine from your perspective. Like, kudos to you for finishing. Like,
Yeah, it took some getting there, but I did in the end.
yeah, a totally different headspace. So yeah, I totally give you credit for that. I would find that very, very, very difficult. So what is one thing you wish you could see your future author self accomplish?
Um,
What's that thing that you're gonna do and you'd be like, this was totally worth it. Like, I made it.
I made it. You know what? I would really, really love, and I think other indie authors will be able to sympathize with this, is that when we distribute our books, it's kind of tough to get them into physical
Yeah,
bookshops,
yeah.
physical
It
bookstores.
would be nice. Yeah, it would be nice to just be like, bam, like $20 is hard to
Yeah,
print books. Like, because $20 I
the
could buy so many of my friends, books on Kindle. It's like, yeah, there's a huge disparity.
the margin is, yeah, the margin is really is really small, especially with print on demand.
Yep.
Um, and one thing that I would really love would be able to walk into a bookshop
Yep.
and see my book on the shelf. I mean, I would be really made up by that, even if
Yeah.
it's just my local bookshop. They picked it up as being, oh, a local author. Oh, well, we'll stock Anna K.
Yeah.
Moss's grimdark fantasy. I would just immediately burst into tears.
Yeah.
I'd just be blown away by it. So, um, to me, that would be wonderful.
I think that's a good one, particularly for indie authors. Like I have an indie bookstore here, and I've talked to the woman that's ran it. I buy way too many books from them. Like if I'm buying, like my friend, like I don't go to Barnes and Noble to buy books for people, mostly myself either. Like I'll go there and I'll look around somewhere else. Amazon, she can order just about anything for me on Amazon. So if I am going to do a paperback like Will White's, she has a really good deal on. So I'll buy all the Will Whites because I can support Will and I get my physical book when I can. And I also support her at the same time. But she was like, yeah, as soon as your books come out, like, let me know. She's like, I'll, keep 5 here all the time. So I was teasing her. I was like, I'm going to write so many books that you're going to need my own section. Like, I'm going to need my own shelf, Laura, like right there. Yeah, I think that's a really good one. I thought about that for a long time with this question. Now I'm like, I really want my book to be a graphic novel because that's what I was supposed to be an illustrator, but that's a really good one. Now I feel like that's mine again. Like that's a really good one. I think a lot of indie authors listening would be like, yeah, that'd be cool.
I mean, if we're going like crazy, proper, wild sort of fantasy thinking,
yeah, give me the fantasy one. Yeah.
Then to see my book, The Worthy, as a film would be like, I would just love that because I've written it in a very, I've written it in a cinematic way. It's and that's actually some of the feedback that I've had from an ARC reader. It's like, cool. I can imagine this so well. I feel like I'm there. Like it's reading like scenes from a movie.
Oh, that's awesome.
I was like, oh, great, because that's really what I wanted to get across. And when you've imagined something in so much detail, a particular scene, you're thinking, how do other people imagine this? How are other readers? What does it look like? This particular room, I sort of described it, but how is it that they're actually seeing it? And so to see something come to life in a medium which you can go, look, this is the world of The Worthy. That would be, wow, my mind would just be we'd be blown. I'd be crying for days at that point.
Yeah, that would be really cool. No, maybe I need a film too. If anybody wants to offer me a deal now, I'll take everything on the table.
Yeah, I'm open to options.
Yeah. And it's like a movie, Netflix, comic, put it in every bookstore, all the airports. That's totally fine. So Anna, obviously, you got debut. My poor kids all day. I've been doing that. I've had like the hardest names to pronounce in world history that I think I've ever had in this stretch, and now I can't talk after this week. So you have your debut novel, The Worthy. Are there any other news, updates, promos, current projects? You said you have some short stories. Just before we head out, just let us know, where we can find these things and what you got on the horizon.
Sure. So yeah, in terms of the short stories and interviews with authors, and also some blog posts around writing, then to check out my website, which is annakmoss.co.uk. But also in the near future, I will start advertising my editorial services, and that will be on my website as well. As I say, it's all been through private referrals until only recently, so that's pretty new and exciting. But I figured I need to get the book launch in August the 15th out of the way first before kind of trying to do anything else, because boy, there is a lot of work involved in a book launch. That's for sure.
I'm like setting mine up like now. Like I have stuff planned where we're gonna get a hold of people in November for literally like June. Like so I definitely understand that. The books I was talking about, they also said they're like, yeah, we need to be like booked 6 months out. I was like, wow. I was like, that's fine, but that's how I do things. But I was like, wow, that's crazy. So yeah, I can totally understand that. So obviously, we'll just remind the audience that, they can find your website right in the description, anywhere where this podcast audio or video is found. You can always find authors like Anna on my website. We will be having the author's profile page up there by now. So make sure you go ahead and take a look at that page. Check out Anna's description, check out her book cover. It'll be right there for you guys. Make sure you're also, reviewing any books that you're reading. I think particularly for indie, really anybody nowadays, just with how publishing is, that's how people are selling books. But particularly if you like indie authors such as Anna, make sure you're reviewing that so that somebody else can get into the algorithm and find her book as well. Anna, thank you so much for coming on today. It was a real pleasure. I really enjoyed like I said, your blurb. So I was really anxious to ask you some questions about it. You got me thinking a lot about a lot of different things, which is good. It's one reason, one of the main reasons I do the podcast is to get my writer brain working. So, but yeah, if you need anything else, just let me know. Like I said, tag me in anything. If you want to get back on sooner, talk about editorial services or anything like that, we can do another one. And I've been trying to get editors on for a while.
Oh, cool.
We're trying to expand on things, not just authors, because I set it up originally to be like that. But yeah, if there's anything else I can do to help you or, your debut out, just let me know and, we'll help you as best we can.
Thank you. That's so kind. And I've really enjoyed today. It's been really fun to do nerdy book chat. This is like this is what I live for. It's been
Yeah.
yeah, I've really enjoyed myself. So thank you so much.
Excellent. Yeah, not a problem. Anytime, anytime. Well, Anna, I hope you have a great rest of the day, and I'll be sending you an email shortly. And like I said, hopefully in the near future, we can get you on again.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Daniel.
Not a problem. Have a good rest of the day.
Cheers. Bye.